Hello, and a very warm welcome to everybody to our latest client experience webinar. Today, as you can see, and as you know, you've signed up to attend a session on AI and particularly global insights on emerging regulation and the key challenges that the team can foresee coming your way. We have a brilliant panel for you today. I'll start at the bottom with Dr. Quan Hon, who is based in London, Chiara Bocchi, who is based in Milan in Italy, Simon Elliott, who is head of Denton's data privacy and cybersecurity practice for the UK, Ireland and Middle East, and also obviously has one of the longest job titles in the firm. Not to be outdone, of course, is Giangiacomo Olivi, who is the co-head of the Intellectual Property, Data and Technology Practice Group from Europe, and also based in Milan in Italy. And I'm going to pass you over to Giangi, who himself was actually part of the Italian government's expert group that was brought together to develop Italy's AI strategy some years ago. So you're hearing it from the experts. And so Giangi, please, over to you.
Anyway, thanks Judith, and thanks everyone. We got 1 hour to talk about AI, and it would normally take at least a day to start to address this subject, because it's a huge subject, very interesting and very relevant for all of us as practitioners, as companies, as citizens. It's very important. So what we will be addressing today, well, we will address the survey, some key results of the surveys we've done as Dentons on a global basis. We are promoting a push for an ethical approach for AI together with a number of friends and partners. And we will also be addressing the top 5 issues to be aware of with regards to AI, which is obviously the current state of regulation. There's a regulatory rush on a global basis. There's a rush to do the strategy on AI for each state. There's a rush to regulate, which regulation and often affect also AI systems based in other jurisdictions. So this is something to be taken into account. We will talk obviously as a direct consequence about the AI governance, and then a significant issue, the data privacy and cybersecurity liability, and then about the latest in town, the ChatGPT, of which we've been talking about a lot in the recent months. But let's start also with a poll. So have you tested ChatGPT to support your job? Yes, no, or what is it? You feel free to answer. The answers are obviously anonymous. We won't account you for that. And whilst we're waiting for the response, we will be addressing ChatGPT with Quan, but you know, this is a system of generative AI that uses a lot of huge data sets. If you think about it, it uses terabytes of text and data, which means 300 kilometers of bookshelf space. So it's expensive. It's very significant to do AI. Lots of companies ask, we would like to set up our own AI system. Well, it's better to use someone else's, but to use it properly. And so let's see which the answers are not there yet. And
well, so if I just, Giangi, if I just give people, those of you that haven't voted, you've got 5 more seconds, and then we will end the poll and share the results.
5 seconds. It's your last opportunity. Okay. And obviously, it's not the only example of AI ChatGPT. It's there's Meta's Galactica that has been released just for 3 months and then taken back for. There's been a Baidu's Ernie that will be launched in 2023. Of course, we've been talking about Lambda in Google, and there's also many other prior examples. But let's see the results of the poll. Yes, you've been using it. No, 62%. I believe this percentage will reduce in the future, particularly when there'll be the newer version of ChatGPT based on GPT-4. But let's then move to the next slide. So so this is something you want to hear about based on your responses. We will be discussing about ChatGPT. This is the response that is given by ChatGPT about who it is or what it is, if we are going to ask to it. But let's also start from a sentence from the European Commission, where they say AI is already part of our lives. In the past, we ran surveys about who was, to a number of companies, about who were using open source. And a number of companies responded, well, the majority said, well, we don't use it. Meanwhile, basically 99% were using it. The same applies to AI. AI is already part of our daily life. And like any innovations applying Amara's laws, it is generally overestimated in the short term, like it is now, but we generally underestimate the impact in the medium term. And that's really the fact with these tools that will become more and more powerful. So let's start discussing first the survey and what's the views of our clients and friends and what the consequence that we may draw. Simon.
Thanks, Jianji, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Delighted you are with us. We'll start this section with another poll. You'll see it up on the screen there. We're asking, to what extent is your organization currently using AI? And there's a number of options there that will come up. And just while I'm giving you all just a second to run through those options and to submit your responses, to explain, as Jianji said, at the back end of 2021 and early 2022, we at Dentons carried out a global survey of clients and friends and contacts in relation to the use of AI within organizations and the perceptions of AI. We published that survey at the start of 2022 last year. It's on our AI Solutions Hub. It's available there. And we have at the back end of last year and early this year repeated the survey, expanded it a little bit. And what we're giving you today is a snapshot of some of the key responses and key questions and key responses that we've got from those. So you're getting it hot off the press ahead of publishing the full survey in the coming weeks. One of the questions we were asking our respondents was to what extent AI was currently being used in organizations. And Judith, if they're ready to
I think if we just again do 5 more seconds, if you haven't yet had your vote, this is your chance, if you like, to benchmark your organization against your peers. So really helpful insight that you're getting here just to see where you currently rank against others. So the last few seconds, right, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll close the poll now and share the results.
Thanks, Judith. So we can see there, if my site will allow me, a relatively small amount of organizations, only 5% are using it extensively at the minute. Quite a large now, nearly half of our attendees today are pilots or using it in some sort of limited way. About a quarter not necessarily knowing, and about a quarter knowing that we're not necessarily using it at the minute. If we just want to skip forward to the next slide, Judith, we'll compare that, for example, with the results of our last couple of polls. So I think we were about 50% or 55% or so of our attendees today were either using it extensively or using it in some sort of trial scheme. You can see from 2022, that was about 60% of our survey respondents, and about 64% in this most recent survey are using this to some extent. So direction of travel, not necessarily dissimilar from our attendees today. And I think we will only start to see that increase. This is a survey. This is one of our questions we were asking our clients about: why were you using AI? What's the greatest benefit? And I think the thing that really strikes me from both this year's results and indeed last year's results is not only is this about efficiencies and improving automated processes, but one of the top 3 answers in both cases is generating business decisions from data-driven decisions. We're actually making really important strategic business decisions based on the insight and tools that AI can give you. So the need for veracity and governance and certainty around these sort of tools, all the more important. Skipping on to the next question. So this was about how much internal governance, how much internal work have organizations undertaken in preparing or looking at a strategic roadmap for the use of AI. Again, 42% last year, 45% this year, slight increase. right direction. But again, really telling. Compare this number to the number we had just two slides ago. About 64% of organizations are using AI in some way, but only 45% have any sort of roadmap or governance around that. And that is very much consistent with what we're seeing in the market. This governance and strategic gap is very much, I think, where most organizations are at the moment. What are some of the biggest risks within your organization, perceived risks that are preventing the use of AI? Data protection challenges, data privacy challenges, top last year, and indeed top again, repeated and top this year. I think particularly noteworthy this year is, and we've got the arrow against it, the perceived costs of AI systems has gone right the way down. That used to be, I think it was number 2 in last year's poll, but right the way down sort of, I think it's about number 7 and number 8. Perhaps some of the perceptions around the pricing models from ChatGPT and other competitors that are coming out, there certainly are significant costs in terms of developing a library and tools. But interesting that that's now not so much of a blocker as it may perhaps was once seen. If we can move on again. So this is a question about awareness of regulation, where organizations aware of how much how they were regulated or which regulators they needed to deal with. Last year, 63% of organizations weren't aware of which public body would be governing or regulating AI. That has decreased a bit, so close to about half of our respondents had some awareness of who was regulating AI in their jurisdiction. In fairness, there probably is a number of jurisdictions where that decision hasn't been made clear yet, but I think this still shows quite a big delta, quite a big gap in relation to what regulation of AI looks like. So finally, just to finish off this section, we'll finish with another poll. So what we're asking here, looking at your organization's use of AI and the investment that you're spending, and whether that's in technology or tools or people, whether you think that will increase or decrease or stay the same in the coming year. And again, we'll benchmark that and compare that to the outcome of the survey that we undertook. So if we're able to throw up the questions or the options, Judith, if we haven't already. Oh, there we go. So you should all now have the opportunity to submit your answers. As I was mentioning, just as you're all doing that, we will be shortly publishing the responses and the full report. So if you do want a copy of that, please do contact us on an email address, which the team will be making available at the end of the session, and we'll be delighted to share our insights with you and certainly discuss any questions of your own insights that you've identified.
Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll end the poll and share the results.
Thanks, Judith. So a whopping majority expecting an increase, about 3/4 of our attendees expecting to increase the investment of AI, which is probably all the reason why you're on this call in the first place. Interestingly, no one expecting a decrease, probably not that much of a surprise. And then if we go on to compare that to what our survey finds, so actually very similar. A very large amount of our respondents expecting increase. In fact, there were a small number were expecting a decrease, only 2%, but I think really showing why it's important to start to get on top of these challenges and look at some of the things that need to be put in place now to prepare organizations for the use of AI. So that's a very quick scamper through some of the high level results that we're seeing. Now we're going to go into the meat of the presentation, look at some of these, what we think are the 5 things you need to be most aware of now. And we'll start with an overview of the regulation, and I'll hand to Chiara for this.
Thank you, Simon. So let's start from the EU. The journey towards a new regulation of AI is still ongoing. It started with a question: is it necessary to issue rules specifically addressing AI? And on the 21st of April 2021, the answer became yes. On that day, the draft AI Act was issued. But why do we have a draft AI Act? Because benefits and risks of AI systems have to be properly addressed. And this, in the European Commission's view, can be done with a dedicated regulation. The final goal is ensuring the protection of fundamental rights and user safety, as well as trust in the development of AI. To this end, the AI Act follows a risk-based approach. AI systems are classified into four categories, which became 5 during negotiations between the Council and the European Parliament. So now we got prohibited AI systems, high-risk AI systems, low risk, minimal risk, and newly added general-purpose AI systems. And according to the risk-based approach, the higher the risk, the stricter the requirements. The highest level of risk triggers a ban on the use of the AI systems, while for less risky AI systems, the focus is more on transparency obligations, aimed at ensuring that the users are aware that they are interacting with an AI system and not with a human being. Most obligations of the AI Act will apply to high-risk AI systems. High-risk AI systems are products or safety components of products that are subject to a third-party conformity assessment before they are being placed on the market. But high-risk AI systems will also include AI systems intended to be used for certain purposes that are identified in the AI Act. And the criteria to determine when an AI system is high risk may also vary in time, as the Commission will be empowered to adopt delegated acts to add high-risk AI systems to the list. General purpose AI systems that can be used as high-risk AI systems will also have similar obligations to those provided for high-risk AI systems. And in a very, very short summary, these obligations will include a quality management system, the drafting of technical documentation, a conformity assessment procedure, comparison, information duties, but also an human oversight mechanism and post-market monitoring systems. The rules will apply mostly to providers, but also the users of high-risk AI systems may be subject to the same obligations as providers under certain conditions. So now we have the general approach, the common position of the Council. This is being reviewed by the European Parliament, and once the European Parliament and the Council reach an agreement on a final text, the AI Act will be final and ready to enter into force. The negotiations may not be too far from being closed. Indeed, according to recent news, the European Parliament is almost ready to propose and discuss a new compromise version. Juan, back to you.
Thanks very much, Chiara. So I'm covering the position in the UK, and there's several areas which could impact on AI. So we only have time to cover a few key developments. The UK government published a national AI strategy in 2021 with a 10-year plan and the ambitious aim of building the most trusted and pro-innovation system for AI governance in the world. There was a white paper due last year, but it's late. We haven't got it yet. But what we do have is we have a policy paper which was out in the middle of last year. And it's interesting to contrast the approach between the UK and the EU. So the UK is not going to implement AI-specific regulation. It's not going to legislate, but rather it's going to be up to regulators to take action based on high-risk AI, not lower risk, real risk, and basically following a high-level set of cross-sectoral principles based on the OECD principles, trying to coordinate regulation with each other. That's the intention to encourage that. And these high-level principles aren't statutory because the intention is that they can be flexible and adaptable. The UK has also set up an AI standards hub, including, for example, algorithmic transparency, recording standards and guidance, but the focus is mainly on technical standards for AI. Regulators have issued various papers calling for comments on issues, which are very much to do with algorithms or AI and the risks and benefits, including the Information Commissioner's Office in charge of data protection, the Financial Conduct Authority, Ofcom for telcos, and so on. We do have the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, which was out last year and then kind of paused. It's going to come back at some point in an amended form. And it seems like it might actually have research exemptions which will allow use of data for AI, but it's not entirely clear yet. We're going to have to wait and see when it comes out. There are other laws that touch on AI, like the National Security and Investment Act, Product Security, etc. Act, Online Harms Bill, but there isn't time to go into that. But lots of areas are going to cover AI. And I'll hand back to Chiara now.
Yes, now we are in the US. Also, the US are making that journey to regulation of AI, starting from the introduction of general artificial intelligence bills or resolutions in some states in 2022, which were focused on specific AI use cases. The US seem now to look to more general AI regulatory initiatives to be developed most likely in 2023. Actually, last January, the minister released its AI risk management framework, which was developed to better manage AI risks to individuals, organizations, and the society as a whole. This framework is intended for voluntary use. It will not be mandatory, and it is aimed at improving the ability to incorporate trustworthiness considerations into the design and the development of AI systems. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chiara. So I think probably we've covered the US, EU, and UK as some of the main jurisdictions that attendees on this call will be worried about. But if you're looking at any sort of governance arrangements for AI across your organization, you need to look at this at a global basis and look at what the themes, trends, and key issues are on a global basis. We've picked out here some of the key developments in relation to some select jurisdictions with input from our Denton's colleagues across Asia Pacific. But one of the key things is the amount of developments here and the need for important horizon scanning and tracking these developments to make sure that your governance framework and rules and guidelines are keeping on top of these. Just to quickly spin through these sort of key developments, China is one of the major kind of jurisdictions in relation to AI sort of developments. Again, in comparison to the EU, we haven't seen, or there's no current development around a central universal AI law. However, there has been a lot historically in China, looking particularly at technology-specific regulation and interestingly managing and governing specifically the development of algorithms. Since 2021, the Cyberspace Administration of China, the CAC, has published guidelines to look at governance and administration of algorithms, very technology-focused specific standards, and also looking over the governance of developments and algorithms, and in certain circumstances requiring the filing of those algorithms for review. There are a wide range of national guidelines looking at specific technology uses, such as AI-generated content, autonomous vehicles, facial recognition, and the use of AI in the medical space. And the latest development we're seeing is through provincial governments, such as in Shenzhen or in Shanghai, lots more regulatory frameworks being built up to promote the use of AI within those regions, so regulatory sandboxes, but also including lists of some prohibited uses of AI. So the kernels of a real developing separate AI legal regime in China. In Korea, again, there isn't a comprehensive AI law yet, but just a few days ago, the Framework Act on Artificial Intelligence passed through a committee stage of parliamentary review, and it's a very significant step towards that sort of European-led model. Interestingly, though, one of the key principles of that legislation is very much a case of approval first and regulate later, in order to facilitate the development of AI before any unnecessary before any unnecessary overregulation or perceived overregulation. The law sets out some high-level ethical standards, and particularly it seems to focus on high-risk areas. Jumping around a little bit, in Singapore, again, no overarching AI law, very much a wait and see approach at the minute, again, not wanting to overregulate in the space. However, there is a model AI governance framework, which is a voluntary technology and sector agnostic approach, setting out some high-level principles that organizations can follow for those that want to achieve ethical and promotion and development of AI. And just quickly to touch on Australia, there's been a number of developments that impact on AI, but certainly at the minute, no obvious developments or are looking at AI-specific legislation. There is a movement towards the tightening up of automated decision-making and privacy law, akin to what we have in GDPR in the UK and EU. There's greater digital platform regulation that will impact on AI, and there has been case law around the ownership of inventions in Australia, but really the patchwork of laws that's there continue. With that, I'll hand over to Chianji.
Thanks, Simon. This time you didn't have to tell me to unmute, but almost. So, so we've seen there's a number of regulations coming up. Certain states decide not to regulate immediately, but already are deploying their strategy. And there's in any event a trend of setting up certain common standards in terms of ethical issues to be addressed. And certain states address more as a more human-centric approach. Other states have an approach more towards security. Others try to combine. But regardless of the existing regulation, what companies need to do, they do need to set up an AI governance and strategy, as well as member states are doing. For instance, member states in the EU are discussing which is going to be actually the supervisory boards that will have to implement the AI regulation. There's a shift at the moment towards the data protection authorities to get that, to cover that area as well. And for companies need to do the same. They need to do the same, and they need to do it now. Why? Because a common trait of certain of the legislation that will be coming up is based on significant sanctions, and also using AI is something that actually touches the essence of a number of companies. So how do you want to address that? How do you want to avoid the risks of facing AI? And how do you want to make it actually a competitive advantage? You need to set up a system and the task force and the governance board that will allow you to manage actually the transition towards new technologies. In order to do that, in another step, we're trying to go very quickly through the main steps. Another step is obviously identify what are your own company values and make sure that your strategy combines with these company values. Clarity on the values is fundamental then for an adequate and a proper implementation strategy. But then once you did set up the board that obviously needs to be at a very high level. So it has to be at the C level, taken as an inspiration of what is already happening with regards to the data protection governance and procedures in a number of jurisdictions. But then it will be necessary to carry out an AI ethics and risk assessment. There are already ethic principles set out in Europe, but also in other jurisdictions, and it's a very, very basic principle. That's the minimum that would have to be achieved. And looking at the future regulations, actually, from a European perspective, for instance, these will be compulsory in certain circumstances with regards to AI systems. And then monitor how the AI system works and how you use it. What are the effects? Is there any potential discrimination? Is there any potential job displacement issues? So there's a number of elements that would have to be taken into account in your impact assessment. Impact assessment that will have to go through the life cycle, and which will have to include also a review of the data sets and the data privacy issues. We will be addressing them with Simon right now. So I'm not talking further about it, but this is obviously a fundamental point, because a proper data set is what makes the overall system working properly, including also proper instruction. And then use a smart and ethical approach towards your data provider as well. After all, AI is also about reputation, and make sure that also your suppliers are using AI properly and they are aware that they're using AI systems. So this means reviewing your checklist, you reviewing also your contract standards and playbooks. AI-based system contracts require different standards, perhaps with more attention with regards to the insurance coverage as compared to the traditional approach with regards to SLA. So there's a lot to do, and the general advice is to start now so that you are ready for when regulation are implemented and you are a step ahead from your competitors. Simon, what about the data privacy issues and cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks, Jianji. So as Jianji's explained, there's a real range that have to be undertaken, of activities to be undertaken and issues to grapple with in developing that governance. Just to focus in on one of those specific areas on privacy and cybersecurity, as we identified in the earlier slide, this is one of the key challenges that organizations perceive in relation to the development of AI. And we are seeing, as Kwan alluded to, some movements and some developments in data protection law to allow there to be better use of data to develop AI, seeing the strength and power that AI can bring. But undoubtedly, the development of AI really is fueled by data and fueled by personal data, and a lot of times. So there are going to continue to be in the future challenges in terms of compliance with these two key obligations. Looking at it from the very basics, firstly, where are we looking at the personal data? Where is this sort of particularly relevant, and considering how we sort of manage that? Well, there's really kind of two lenses to look at the use of personal data in the context of most AI systems. One is in relation to the use of the data for test purposes and for the developing the model of the algorithms. And the other is then, of course, in the deployment of the AI itself, the live use of it. How is it being used in the business? How is it interacting with your customers as a chatbot? How is it making decisions on an HR recruitment perspective? Those both have to be considered through some of the key principles in relation to sort of how you are able to use that data set. And both of them have to it's not possible to really look at an AI system holistically like that. You do have to divide down those principles and look at it. So, some key obligations, just looking at the data that you're using, is there some purpose limitation restrictions? Where's that test data come from? How do you have to navigate through either certain research exemptions, or perhaps is there looking at some of the obligations or some of the ways in which you can navigate not incompatible processing activities to allow reuse of that personal data. Transparency about how that data is going to be used is one of the key challenges that comes up frequently in relation to AI. However, we are seeing a lot of development in this. I think the key takeaway really from this is to there is a bit of challenge that needs to be done and a bit of close work that needs to be done between the lawyers, the compliance teams and the technologists on this, actually looking about what's the purpose that you're going to be using this data for, what features are going to be tested, what statistical models are actually going to be tested. This can't be a simple, we're going to collect everything and check everything, and that's not really the way that AI models are developed. They always have a specific objective or purpose in mind, and really challenging going through that process of validating what is actually going to be looked at, what is going to be the objective, and what are we going to see as success, will actually drive a clearer way of being able to try to develop or explain how some of this data is going to be used in a sort of sensible way, or a transparent way. There is challenges around finding a legal basis. Consent for those countries that have a consent-based solution does tend to be a challenge. Legitimate interests for European and UK colleagues typically will be the basis in which you'll be looking at for that use of personal data, but that does revolve that balancing test that needs to be undertaken. But again, that is really a question of then challenging and pushing the developers and working together as a team to really identify where are those key risks and what can be mitigated. In relation to some of the key data protection aspects, just to pick up on perhaps two elements from that come up regularly in data protection sort of consideration that do appear to be a challenge from an AI perspective. One is adequacy, and the other is this idea of fairness or discrimination. Looking at accuracy in the first place, And really the important point to draw it here is there is a difference, or an acknowledged difference, between accuracy from a data protection perspective and statistical accuracy of the output of the actual algorithm and the model. It's acknowledged that there isn't necessarily always a 100% a statistically accurate decision. No model is able to predict the future with absolute perfection. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is an inaccurate processing for the purposes of data protection perspective, but there are certain things that need to be done and some practical steps need to be taken in order to try and make sure that that is maintained. So making sure that the outcome of those statistical modeling, the outcome of the algorithm, is known and recognized as an outcome, not as a fact. It's not being treated in that way. Make sure that the system in the first place is statistically accurate within a sufficient parameters for the purpose for which you're trying to use it. Clearly, some purposes need to be closer to more accurate than others. It depends on the risk. And do constantly assess for model drift within that underlying algorithm. So that's as the population of data that's being used changes, that accuracy will revert over time. Fairness and discrimination, where does that come from? Well, the research has shown that fundamentally most of the discrimination that comes through from algorithmic developments is from the underlying data sets that are being used to test. That will either be because certain proportions of the population are underrepresented in the test data, or indeed that historical human-based decisions have generated a degree of unknown bias that's been reflected in the data. So that really the test, or the practical steps here, are to really to carry out some tests. It's possible to run some software over tests to sort of start to demonstrate whether there is certain specific bias against protected groups in the underlying data, and then to assess whether there's ways in which that data can be supplemented, adjusted, tweaked. They look at the use of synthetic data or other types of data in order to try and balance out some of those issues. These aren't straightforward tasks. These need discussions and involvement and cross-practitioner teams, but they are possible ways of managing these. Just very quickly to pick up on a couple of the other points. AI enforcement, we're definitely seeing this already. Clearview AI, for those that are aware of it, is the most obvious example of this. This is the organization that was scraping images and location from the websites, from the World Wide Web, and selling it to law enforcement. We've seen multi-million-pound fines in regulatory enforcement worldwide. Practical issues, I think Janji's touched on a lot of the good points here already. Developing your data protection impact assessments to look at issues around ethics, to look at issues around equality, and carrying out that general constant renewal, and looking at your third-party vendors. And all I'll say on AI and cybersecurity is that it's a two-sided coin. Certainly, some of the additional threat vectors that are thrown up as a result of some of the risks that are brought with AI are a significant challenge, but equally those tools that can start to help better identify particular behaviors, or help to identify more vulnerable threat vectors within an organization, can be very powerful as well. So that's a quick overview of something that could be a session in itself. With that, I'll hand over to Chiara.
Thank you, Simon. So turning to the liability issue, as far as the EU is concerned, liability is the other side of the coin on which the European institutions are currently working. Indeed, not only the AI Act, but also an AI liability directive was proposed and is being discussed. In the European Commission's view, the AI Act and the AI liability directive complement and reinforce each other. The AI Act provides for safety rules aimed at reducing risks and preventing damages. But as risks cannot be eliminated in their entirety, liability rules are needed to ensure that individuals can obtain effective compensation in the event of damages caused by AI systems. New rules are needed because current national fault-based liability rules seems not well equipped to handle claims for damage caused by AI systems. In fault-based liability claims, the victim has to prove the fault, the damage, and the causal link between the fault and the damage. And this is not always easy, especially when AI systems are involved due to their features of complexity, opacity, and autonomy. All these features make it difficult for the victims to meet the burden of proof. And if the features of AI system, if their so-called black box effect make it too difficult to access compensation, then there is no effective access to justice. So by guaranteeing an effective compensation, the AI Liability Directive will give its contribution to the protection of the right to an effective remedy and to the right of a fair trial. And these are clearly fundamental EU values. The new directive tries to achieve this aim by introducing two measures: rebuttable presumptions and disclosure obligations. And both these measures are considered as the least interventionist tool for easing the burden of proof without providing for a reversal of the burden of proof. Because a reversal of the burden of proof would expose providers, operators, and also users of AI systems to higher liability risks, and higher liability risks may hamper innovation. So starting from the first measure, the presumption of causality, this measure applies when three conditions are met. The first one, the claimant has to prove the fault of the defendant. The second one consists in the defendant being able to demonstrate that it is reasonably likely, based on the circumstances of the case, that the fault has influenced the output of the AI system. And the third and the last conditions requires the claimant to demonstrate that the output of the AI system gave rise to the damage that has to be compensated. And if all these circumstances are met, the claimant will be relieved from explaining in detail how the damage was caused by a certain fault or omission by an AI system. And given that we got rebuttable presumption, the liable person will be entitled to rebut the presumption. The second and last measure proposed in the AI Liability Directive is the disclosure obligation. National courts will be empowered to order to a provider or to a user to disclose relevant evidence about a given high-risk AI system that is suspected of having caused a damage. And to obtain the order for disclosure, the claimant will have to present facts, to present evidences sufficient to support the claim for damages. And the claimant will also be required to prove to have undertaken all attempts at gathering himself or herself the relevant evidence from the defendant. The order for disclosure will obviously be subject to certain safeguards to protect the confidential information. And the last thing to note is that in case of non-compliance with the order of disclosure, the AI Liability Directive provides for a rebuttable presumption of non-compliance with a duty of care. And now, Juan, the floor to you to discuss about ChatGPT.
Thanks very much, Chiara. So if you want to use ChatGPT in your work, what do you need to know? Well, the most important thing to understand is you have to figure out what it is and what it is not. It's an online chatbot, but quite different from the online chatbots that most of us struggle with on many websites. This is a large language model, LLM chatbot. And what it's great at is statistically, it can predict the next word that should appear in a sentence. So if you say to be or not to be, it'll know that the next bit should be, that is the question. So it's quite good at predicting words in sequence. In fact, in the University of Minnesota, they tested it and it passed 4 law exams. At Wharton, they actually tested it on an MBA exam and it passed that as well. However, there have been quite a few problems that have been found regarding ChatGPT, so you have to be aware of its limitations. The first is accuracy. You can't actually trust it. It can predict words in sequence, but it doesn't actually know anything. It doesn't understand anything. It gets things wrong. It hallucinates, as it said. It makes things up, even though it sounds really authoritative when it does it. And it even makes up its sources or refuses to provide them. I found that sometimes. So a noted privacy expert tried to find out, get ChatGPT to tell something about him, and it said he was dead, although he's not, and it cited an obituary, a non-existent obituary, to say he was dead. So, it does make things up. Another problem is that it can't count, it can't do arithmetic, it can't do maths. One example is if you give it the names of two known basketball players and say, which one's taller, then it says, oh, X is this height, Y is that height, and therefore one of them's taller, and it's the wrong one, it's the one who's shorter. It can't actually compare the numbers and figure that out. So that's an important limitation. Also, of course, because it's been trained on content from the web for lots of content for years, it will actually build in the biases from the content that was used to train it. So there are risks of discrimination. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, did try to put in some guardrails against discrimination and against issues like banned answers, what it shouldn't be saying. But of course, people have managed to get around that. So they can get it to swear, they can get it to say all sorts of things, undesirable things that it shouldn't be saying. It also has been known to misbehave, and in Microsoft Bing trials with it, has even been threatening users, which you would not expect. And the final point, which is probably easier to get around, is that this current version only has information up to summer 2021 and not beyond, and it can't do live searches, but new versions can probably do that and get more information. Now, on the privacy and security front, obviously, Simon's already discussed a lot of the issues there, but when you're using ChatGPT, of course, a major issue is you mustn't, in your questions, in your prompts, as they put it, put in anything confidential or sensitive. For example, if you put personal data in there, then it's being transferred to the US for GDPR purposes. You could probably use it as a Microsoft Azure tenant using the API that's being made available for ChatGPT. In that situation, maybe it's safer to use it on your own documents and not be at such risk over confidentiality, but beware of the terms, make sure you know exactly what can and can't be accessed by Microsoft, etc. Now, in terms of the security, another interesting point is actually it has been used, it can and has been used to write phishing emails with good grammar that can fool people. And it can write code for ransomware. Now, if you tell it, please, would you write me some code on ransomware, its guardrails will kick in and it'll say, nope, I'm not going to do that. But if you phrase the question differently and say, write some code to encrypt servers, it can do that. So, it is not that hard to get around, and bad guys are probably already using it for all sorts of things. Another issue is intellectual property, particularly copyright. Obviously, it has been trained on text that has been scraped from all over the web. And in a slightly different example of generative AI that generates images rather than text, again, that's been trained on images that have been obtained from all over the web. And there is litigation at the moment about the copyright in those images. Also, ChatGPT can word for word reproduce text. If you ask it about certain publications, it might actually spit out the exact wording, plagiarize the exact wording of that publication, you could say. So, again, there are risks of copyright infringement in terms of its results. If lawyers want to use it, it can write terms and clauses. It can write privacy notices. I think Simon found some quite good privacy notices that it had written. And sorry, you can also say, well, give me legal advice on this point. But of course, there are very big risk and liability issues if you're trying to use ChatGPT for legal documents or legal advice. For one thing, it's not good with case law, possibly because it's not necessarily free to scrape all the cases that exist. It will not, as already discussed, cite citations, references, sources. Obviously, there are currently issues with pricing and terms as well. It's very expensive to run, and okay, we've got free trials at the moment, but eventually it's going to probably be charged for, and we will see exactly how much. The terms of use are important. OpenAI itself does exclude obligations and liabilities, and in a slightly different context, I don't know whether you've heard of the Lensa app, where you can upload your own photo, and then you can ask the app to retouch the photo, show what would I look like in the style of Picasso or Van Gogh, etc. But the terms of that app say that actually the company has rights to the images you upload and to the images you produce. So you've got to be quite careful about the ownership of the output. If you do want to have lawyers using ChatGPT, obviously it's important that you have senior lawyers with appropriate expertise checking its output, at least for confidentiality and copyright issues, etc. If you are going to be using it to provide output to clients, then obviously your own terms as regards your clients, you've got to be careful and make sure you've got disclaimers and exclusions, because of course your own liability will be an issue. So in terms of my personal wish list for ChatGPT or similar, I think it's fine, but I would like it to list and link to all its sources so I can actually verify. There is a search engine, an AI search engine called Neva, which currently says it does that. But unfortunately, when I've tried it, it just links to Wikipedia. So I could look that up directly without AI. Another wish list item is I would like it to produce confidence levels as to, what percent accuracy it thinks this answer is. I don't know whether it can or can't do that, but that would help. Microsoft, it seems, is going to introduce ChatGPT in Office 365. And I'm personally, again, I'm slightly concerned about that because I would like to have other changes which are made before introducing things like ChatGPT, like killing off this modern commenting that's really hard to use in Word, and the too much vertical space in Outlook, so you can't read your email properly without lots of scrolling. But basically, the main point is be very, very careful if you're thinking about using ChatGPT. And now I'll hand back to Chiara, and we're going to start the key takeaways.
Thank you, Juan. So our first takeaway is a very important recommendation. You should all monitor developments on AI regulations, as it is more likely than not that any business will fall within the scope of application of AI regulation. To make an EU example, the AI Act will apply to AI system providers, to their authorized representatives, to importers, distributors, users, as well as to product manufacturers. So consequently, the AI Act will affect almost everyone that uses or places on the market in the EU an AI system, regardless of whether they are physically present in the EU or established in the EU or in a third country. Our second takeaway is another recommendation. So don't hesitate, don't wait, and start designing and implementing an AI governance strategy, including also an AI provider's due diligence process. Why? Because fines for non-compliance with AI regulations may be very high. For example, again, looking at the EU, the AI Act provides for fines which are even higher than those provided under the GDPR.
As regards privacy and cybersecurity, from Simon's explanation early on, you can tell it is a very hot issue. It is a very live issue. We've got data privacy laws now, not just in the future as regards AI laws that are in the pipeline. We have that in force now. There are lots of fines. So it's important really to make sure you know what the issues are, you consider them carefully. They're not unsurmountable. They can be got round as long as you take the right steps. And of course, as previously mentioned, AI can actually help cybersecurity by helping to detect attacks and the like.
Non-compliance with the requirements provided by the AI regulations to ensure safety, to ensure damages prevention, will increase the risk that the business is held liable for damages caused by the output of the AI systems or the failure to produce an output that was to be provided. For example, the failure to comply with the AI Act for high-risk AI systems will constitute an element triggering one of the rebuttable presumptions of which we talked about earlier on.
And on ChatGPT, be careful, beware of the hype. It's very exciting. Don't get carried away by it. Remember, you need to understand what it can do and what it can't do. And not just its benefits and failings, but of course, in the context of your specific use cases, for what you want to use it for, consider the costs and the pricing, the contract terms, as well as privacy, security, and intellectual property issues.
Thank you so much to all of you. I mean, talk about information packed into a very short amount of time. You've really given us a lot to think about. If anyone does want to ask the panel a question, now is your chance. You can put your question in the chat, or you can come off mute and pose your question directly. I know that many people are shy, so also feel free to email or connect with our panel after the session as well. I'm going to keep on talking unless someone interrupts me. So assuming there aren't any questions front of mind, just want to say that the team recognize that the regulation is obviously changing everywhere, constantly, it seems, from the presentation today. And therefore, if you're wanting to keep track of developments and keep on top of this conversation, then it would be of great benefit to you, I think, to visit Denton's AI Global Solutions Hub, which you can find on our website. And as we were saying earlier, one of the advantages of our survey is it helps you benchmark your own organization and your own journey. So if you would like a copy of that survey, again, you know where we always are, same time every week, and always at this email address, cxprogram@dentons.com. Simply email us and we can send you slides from today, the survey results when they come out, and also, if you would like it, a recording of today's session. But otherwise, I will close today's meeting and say thank you again to our speakers for such an insightful session. And hopefully we will see everybody again at the sessions that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. Lots more great content to share with you. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.